Another week, another deluge of news from the Trump White House. We'll break it down with Representatives Mike Bishop and Debbie Dingell. And should Michigan eliminate the state income tax? Today is Sunday, February 19th, 2017, and this is Flashpoint. Hi, welcome to Flashpoint. I'm glad you're with us this morning. First, if you were with us last week, you heard Wayne County Executive Warren Evans say he believed Dan Gilbert's bid to swap the county jail location for a soccer stadium was intriguing enough to warrant further study. And sure enough, this week that study was ordered. And as Evans predicted on our program, we expect it'll be a few months and then we'll have a decision. Now, it should be an interesting week in Detroit. Mayor Duggan is going to present his State of the City address coming up on Tuesday night. We're going to talk about that. We'll also talk about the proposal to eliminate Michigan's income tax a little later on. But up first this morning, we will sort through the many topics that emerged from Thursday's astonishing news conference in Washington. In fact, it was very much a news conference, given President Trump's focus on the news, the coverage that he clearly spends a lot of time watching and that clearly gets under his skin. Now, it won't hurt anyone's approval ratings to take shots at the American media. I get that. But I suddenly realized that our problems with fake news are now complicated by the fact that we may have a difference of opinion over what constitutes fake news. I thought, as I think most journalists do, that fake news stories were those that were complete fabrications, just scurrilous nonsense fed into the social media pipe that somehow becomes accepted as truth by some. Well, the president, however, seems to slap the fake news label on stories that he doesn't necessarily find are all that newsworthy. And that's how we ended up with him telling us that the news leaks from the White House are real, but the stories they lead to are fake. Now, largely we saw a president frustrated by coverage that describes chaos, where he says there is actually a finely tuned machine. Well, what is that machine producing? Up first, Michigan Congressman Mike Bishop and Michigan Congresswoman Debbie Dingell today on Flashpoint. Let's start with that issue of a finely tuned machine after another rambunctious week in Washington. Very happy to have with me two members of the Michigan congressional delegation. In fact, two members of the Detroit metro area congressional delegation. Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Dingell is here, Republican Congressman Mike Bishop. Thank you both very much for being here. Congresswoman, let me start with you. Do you see a well-oiled machine right now, or is it chaos in Washington?
Well, I think, honestly, and I'm trying to be positive, but it's kind of hard. I see chaos, and I think that our heads are just whipping as we go from one crisis to the next crisis to which subject do we need to be the most worried about. And there are a number of things that are impacting people's everyday lives, especially here in Michigan.
I'm going to ask you in a second about what is the subject that's worrying you the most, but before I do that, do you see a well-oiled machine that he's not getting credit for?
You know, I think the media likes to see what it likes to see. Yesterday was a great example of that. I do know that this is a new administration. This is a guy who's never been in politics before. This is a new environment for him. And with all of everything going on and the many issues that are on the table right now, I think they need more time to get things in order. It's clear that it's not as orderly as it should be.
What is your biggest worry right now that you see in this array of issues that are facing things right now in Washington?
You know, we hear from constituents every day on issues. Health care is usually the #1 issue that we hear about every day. National security is a huge issue that we hear about every day. And the economy.
You, though, personally, what's one that is most vexing
you? Day. Well, the one that keeps me up at night is probably the national security issue. And the many issues that we face around this world and right here in our country. So it's something that I keep a close eye on, and I do whatever I can to make sure that I'm up on top of.
Congresswoman, take me back then to what you were about to mention as what worries you the most.
Well, there are a lot of issues, as Mike says, but national security clearly continues to be the Russia situation, not on what were they trying to do in the election, which worries me, but even the aggressive actions that they took last week is concerning. Affordable Care Act scares me to death because there's so many people that are scared that they're going to lose their insurance or they don't know what's going to happen, and that's got them worried. The environment, we're getting ready to go into spring, and what's going to happen with a number of things that we all care about here, and I could probably give you 10 more things, and that's part of the challenge right now.
I'd like to ask you both about the situation with Russia. Congressman, it seems to, I don't care who you voted for, whichever side you're on this, it better trouble you that Russia was trying to influence our election. And these conversations that seem to take place before the election, then before the inauguration, after the election, and since, do those not bother you?
Well, I think we've got to let this play out. We've got both the House and the Senate now have introduced bills to address the issue. They've got the leaders of both chambers now talking about investigations, and these are Republican leaders on both sides that have decided that this is going to be a priority for us to begin a process of reviewing and investigating.
Appropriate for General Flynn to call someone in Russia, I'm not sure, we don't exactly know how high up this went, but to call and say, to kind of undermine the decisions of the Obama administration on sanctions and say, just keep your powder dry, things are going to be different in a couple of weeks.
Now, we don't know exactly what happened, but clearly the Trump administration and Trump himself, President Trump, was not happy with what happened. He asked for General Flynn's resignation, and he gave it to him. And I think under the circumstances, this was a matter that was handled in a way that President Trump felt that was best for the country.
Was it appropriate for that phone call to be made in earnest at the beginning of this to say, look, these sanctions are in place, but they're not going to be there forever? Is that an appropriate phone call to make, or is that somehow, I don't want to say treasonous, but is it?
We need an investigation in a bipartisan way. I don't have the facts, so I'm not, when it comes to national security, I'm going to be very careful. But I'm very deeply disturbed. We know the Russians hacked us. I'm one of the people they hacked. Did they try to impact the election? He's president now, but I still want to know what they're up to. And when they do things like buzz one of our destroyers or have a ballistic test and then also come off the coast of Connecticut with a submarine, something's going on. So we need to have the facts, and we need to know if they have anything that they're holding over somebody's head. But national security goes beyond Russia. I mean, he's meeting with world leaders, not quite sure the impression he's leaving with a lot of these world leaders. And when you talked about, well, I said national security, in this state, we're worried about the travel ban and the targeting of people because of their religion. That's all I'm doing. When I am home, these next 10 days, I am leaving my house at 6 a.m. and working to midnight every night, just on these issues.
He's promising a new version of this immigration ban or travel ban this week. What are you expecting to be the difference?
I don't know. I'm deeply disturbed by some of the ways that he's attacked the Supreme Court, happy that we got to stay. But I'm told that on Thursday there were briefings of a number of people, and on one of the executive orders targeting, because there was question about whether it was legal, they're expanding the list of number of people that's going to be targeted to millions and millions of people. The unrest, the uneasiness, the concern. We have a constitution, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, our liberties matter. We got to protect the Constitution.
What do you expect is going to be different about what's coming this week from what it was?
I don't know.
Make it more palatable to the courts, I guess.
I don't know exactly what they'll do, but I will say that the 7 countries that are impacted by this immigration pause are countries that were identified by the Obama administration, and they're countries that represent a clear and present threat to the United States of America. And there are real issues with regard to how we bring in immigrants into this country. We are a nation of immigrants. This area alone, we have plenty of immigrants in this area, and we ought to be doing everything we can to make sure that whatever we do is right and proper, constitutional, and we don't step on civil liberties. But we also have an obligation to ensure that we are safe and sound, that our families are safe. All of the investigative organizations, including the FBI, the Homeland Security, every single one of them have indicated that we don't know who's coming from these countries, and we've got to do something. So we can complain all we want to, but we've got to figure out how to address this issue.
I'd like to move to Obamacare.
I want to say, national security does matter, but national security also means defending the fundamental pillars. So it's a delicate balance we got to work together on and not make sure people are being targeted because of their religion.
You're both spending a lot of time thinking about the Affordable Care Act and what comes next. Congressman, a lot of people have complained that to repeal it, you've had 6 years to come up with its replacement. And when Paul Ryan was asked, is there a plan? He said, yes, we've got a lot of ideas. Now, that's a very different thing than a plan, a lot of ideas. Are the pieces there to be pulling it out and then rolling something out new, or is that a dangerous way to approach this?
There is a plan in place. If you look up better.gop, it explains our plan. But Obamacare is crumbling as we speak. I get so many calls to my office from families, from businesses who just cannot afford health care anymore because of how bad this is. It's only going to get worse under the circumstances that we're in right now. Providers are leaving. The answer to the question is we can't not do anything.
But clearly there are a lot of pieces of it that have to stay, and in fact you this week came out in support of the Pre-Existing Conditions
Absolutely, yeah.
Protection Act. So there are a lot of parts of this that you expect will stick around, won't they?
Well, you know, the pre-existing condition issue is one that we want to make sure is a pillar of whatever replacement we have. We also believe that children should be allowed to stay on their parents' policy until they're 26 years old. There are things that we can agree upon, but what we should all agree on is that the current situation is completely unacceptable, and average Americans can no longer afford health care.
Congresswoman, your district, I think, is sort of centrally played a part in this for decades because, of course, your husband, John, every year that he was in Congress, introduced health care legislation. Where do you want this to go, and what do you think your constituents want to see?
I have a very, my district's reflective of the country, so I have people on many sides of it. I have a great deal of respect for my colleague. Mike, I would disagree with you that it's not working for some people. Some people have had increases in their premiums. I want to, this isn't a political game, this is real people's lives. People are scared to death wherever I go that they're going to lose their health insurance. Our governor is supporting Healthy Michigan and saying in Washington, please don't repeal this. We decreased by 50% the uninsured in the state of Michigan. You know, I was glad to see that you're supporting and making sure that we protect the people with pre-existing conditions aren't hurt in some way. I was at a briefing this week about the Republican bill and was told that the pre-existing conditions was going to be eliminated. And I said, that's not the case. The devil's in the details, because the way that it is written right now, and it's not the separate bill that Mike is supporting, is that a lot of people with pre-existing conditions aren't going to be able to afford the insurance. They're putting them in high-risk pools, the affordability of it's going to be. Some people have been able to afford their premiums. We've got to address the small business exemption, or that's one issue. Their Cadillac tax is another issue. There are things that are working, there are things that are not working. I just want to make sure that if you live in this country, you've got access to affordable quality health care. And we got to make sure that that stays there, that we've got affordable plans, and we both need to do something about prescriptions drugs whose prices are escalating way too high.
I want to quickly get to where you think, I know you both happen to think that Michigan is pretty well situated when it comes, because committee appointments are a terribly important part of where your influence goes. We've lost some titans, of course, out of Congress over the last couple of years, but you're going to be serving on Means and Ways. Ways and Means Committee, and you're going to be on the Energy Committee, and I know that you both believe that Michigan's fairly well positioned, not beyond the two of you.
We were very lucky, but Tim Walberg joins me on Energy and Commerce. John Molinar got the Appropriations Committee, and Dave Trott got Financial Services, which are core committees for the American business, and we all work together. I think that's, you know, we've got to work for Michigan, and that's something we all try to do.
Your thoughts?
Well, you know, I'm on Ways and Means, and this is all about business and the economy.
We're going to go with Means and Ways from now on.
You just almost made me see that. But the point is that this is going to be the epicenter of a lot of activity for really reforming our economy and tax policy, and I'm very excited to be a part of it. And I just am eager to get into this process of turning this economy around.
Do you think the president has the full support of your party right now, or is there some wavering?
I think both sides realize that we are at a crossroads in this country, that we have got to do whatever we can to come together as a Congress and address issues that we talked about earlier: national security, health care, all of the economy issues. We have got to do that and put all of this other stuff aside. There are sideshows going on both sides, and we need to just focus on those issues that are important in this country.
I think you feel that way. That's what you said before we started the conversation.
Well, I think we've got to come together, but my job is also to protect the Constitution, to make sure that people aren't going to suddenly not have health insurance. And in this state, what happened on the travel ban is deeply, deeply disturbing, in the targeting of people by religion.
Got to leave it there. Thank you both very much for being here this morning. I appreciate it. We'll bring in Nolan Finley and Stephen Henderson, talk about the state of the state in Detroit coming up this week. This is Flashpoint on Local 4. Welcome back. I am so used to saying Nolan Finley and Stephen Henderson. No offense, Rod Maloney. My roundtable guest this morning.
But you're pretty too, Rod.
Well, thank you. Yes, thank you very much.
My colleague, our
I'm
business
satisfied.
editor, my colleague, our business editor here at Local 4, Rod Maloney, of course. And it was a nice free pub for Stephen Henderson, wasn't it? And the editorial page editor of the Detroit News, Nolan Finley. Yeah. Nolan, you had an interesting point. I want us to get into a couple of other things, but before we leave what's going on in Washington, you got an interesting point about the media's need to, I believe as you described it, we need to create a hierarchy of hysteria. Explain that.
I mean, we absolutely do. If we're going to go nuts over everything. I mean, somebody tweeted out the other day, I thought was very prescient, if everything's a scandal, nothing's a scandal. And we've got to decide what we need to get worked up about and what we need to just, let go, because we're looking very petty when we react to everything he says and does as if he just pushed the button.
Which is difficult because he reacts to everything that he sees and hears. He is more in tune with what goes on in the media than I got to believe any president we've ever had. He really watches religiously, even though he says that he doesn't watch very much.
So are we going to get drawn down to that level? Are we going to play that game? I think he's baiting us, and I really believe we lose that game. You look at, he said yesterday, y'all's approval rating is lower than Congress's, which turned out to not be true, but it's certainly no worse or no better than his.
Yeah, it wasn't hard for anybody to believe that one. Rod, you and I have talked about this behind the scenes a lot. The media and the press, we've got to get this right, and yet we don't have meetings. We don't really work in lockstep with everyone. It's really difficult for us to sort of create a code of conduct. What Nolan's saying, though, is on the money.
I think one of the problems that exists here is that you have two groups speaking entirely different languages, quite literally. One speaking Cantonese, the other French, okay? The media has this certain set of guardrails and where they want things to operate in, and they're used to having things operate in. Donald Trump's over here.
Along with his group of supporters.
With his supporters.
Right.
And if you listen to Donald Trump talk, everything he's doing is exactly what he did during the campaign. He hasn't changed a lick in that regard.
In fact, since he mentioned Hillary Clinton, I think 11 times in that news conference on Thursday, he is still very much in campaign mode. Yeah.
And so I think he's trying to say, hey guys, you might want to listen to us over here since I won. That's what he's saying. The media is overseeing, what is going on? This is unhinged. They're calling him unhinged.
But I'm seeing a lot of things that bother me about our profession. Guys, I mean, I've seen reporters, particularly broadcast reporters, tweeting out this sort of combative language with the president, challenging him all night long, every tweet he sends out. I think we've got to really commit to our principles, and one of those is fairness. And we've been reporting everything from a doomsday perspective without recognizing there's half the country out there who's saying, yeah, this is good stuff.
All right, let's move to a couple other topics before we do, so I don't want to run out of time here, but let's talk about whether or not this idea in Lansing to do away with the state income tax, which we've seen in other states, Florida, Texas, chief among them, really has any legs. Is there any chance that this actually happens, Rod?
Well, when you consider that it's being pushed out to 2057, is it really happening? I guess is my question. Incremental little steps until 2057, and I don't see it happening for one reason, and that is because they don't have replacement revenue. Either that, or they come up with a scheme to replace that revenue at some juncture. Now, whether they raise the sales tax a penny or something like that to replace
Which seemed to be the most important part of the equation because the state is very reliant on that money. It's an enormous piece of the budget, Nolan. So to talk about doing away with it without its replacement.
We've tried this before. I mean, Engler started us on a path toward this. It lasted for a few tenths of a percentage points. Granholm came in and blew it away, said we're not going to do this, and then spent the next 8 years blaming the fiscal problems on that small reduction in the income tax. Same thing will happen with this. If you look at the other states that have zero income tax, they tend to have higher property taxes, other taxes that make up for it. I think it's a legitimate discussion to say, is the income tax the the best way to raise the state's revenue. But you can't just say we're not going to raise state revenue with any tax. It doesn't work that way.
And I would point out that for all of the talk of this, fixing the roads and the money, the extra, we saw the bump in the gasoline prices because they're collecting more there. The fact of the matter is we still don't have enough money going in the roads. I just did a story last week about 50% of all of the bad gas mains in the entire region are in the state of Michigan. Well, where's the money coming from to fix that? We don't have enough money as it is. So cutting the income tax may be one of those sort of macroeconomic things that they can do to try and make the climate better. But that's you're kind of out there on a limb.
And Brownback tried this in Kansas, and the Republican legislature is now rolling back those tax cuts, raising taxes because they simply couldn't run the state. This has to be part of a comprehensive plan that addresses tax levies and spending and comes up with the optimum formula.
Just a couple minutes left. We've got the mayor is going to give his State of the State address coming up this Tuesday night. I assume, Rod, that we're still going to see this, we still have that divide that we talk about. There's a lot of wonderful things happening downtown and a lot of people in neighborhoods who don't believe that it's all reaching them. The mayor has pretty much been neighborhood when it comes time to give these kind of addresses. I expect that again, don't you?
Well, yeah, I think he's going to continue to try and push his agenda. I mean, last week Brian Banks ended up out of the legislature. He was the one against the de-insurance, and I think that he's going to push that hard. And I think he's going to try and move on with some of the agenda items that he hasn't been able to get past so far. But yes, he needs to get out into the neighborhoods. And again, one of the things that I've always talked about with the city of Detroit, and I'm sure, Nolan, you agree, that for the city of Detroit to prosper, for the neighborhoods to get better, the schools need to get better. And until that happens, it's going to be very difficult to make the other 134,000 square miles of the city of Detroit actually functional.
And I can see he's a little bit of Al Pacino in The Godfather 3. Every time I think I'm out, they pull me back in. He says time and again he really doesn't want the schools on his plate, but they are on his plate, and he finds them
they're on his plate
center
by default, but I don't know if he'll come up with an answer any more than anyone else has tried this. Let's remember, this effort to fix these schools goes back to John Engler. He couldn't do it. Granholm couldn't do it. Snyder hasn't been able to do it. God bless Mike Duggan if he can figure out the formula. But this is a systemically broken school district, and I haven't seen any.
And now growing uproar over this plan over closures. And
the reality is there are more seats, twice as many seats in this district as you have students. If you're going to stay on a balanced budget path, we just eliminated all the debt with the bailout, you're going to have to cut seats.
And not only cut seats, but I think you also, I think that in the end, with this particular issue, it's not a Mike Duggan issue, it's a legislature issue, because I'm wondering if paying for schools through property taxes is the right answer.
Yeah, got to take another quick break. We'll be back with more on Flashpoint right after this. Welcome back. Before we go, we're talking about the State of the City address coming up on Tuesday night from the mayor. He's announced, Rod, that he is going to run for re-election. How do you see this shaping up, this mayoral election?
There's rumbling that perhaps Coleman Young Jr. might run against him. Could make it an interesting race. I'm not so sure that Duggan would be threatened by that or would lose to that. But competitive races are nice, aren't they, Nolan?
Well, I agree. I think it's good for the city, be good for the mayor to face a competitive challenge.
All right, we will have the mayor's address for you live here on Local 4 and on Click on Detroit. Meet the Press coming up next. Have a great week. See you next time on Flashpoint.